King Draven Ashfell had not truly looked at his Omega in 3 years. He knew she existed. He passed her in the halls sometimes, a pale, soft-spoken young woman named Selene, always standing a little apart from everyone else, always the last to speak and the first to leave a room. He knew the Pack Council had bonded her to him after his first wife died giving birth to his son. He knew she lived in the castle, wore his mark on her neck, and shared his name. But knowing these things was not the same as seeing her, and Draven had not truly seen Selene in a very long time. His son, Prince Cailan, had been only 3 days old when his mother's heart stopped beating. Draven had been consumed by grief that year, the kind of grief that swallows a man whole and leaves him unable to hold even the smallest, most fragile things close. He could not bring himself to hold his newborn son for weeks. It was Selene, quiet and untested, barely more than a girl herself, who stepped into the space he could not fill. She was the one who woke at every cry in the night, who learned by trial which songs would calm the baby, and which would only make him cry harder. She sat beside his cot through fevers that frightened even the healers, pressing cool cloths to his small forehead until dawn, when the council, desperate for stability in a grieving kingdom, pushed her toward the Alpha King's bond mark. She accepted a crown that came with no kindness, no warmth, and barely any words from the man she now belonged to. Draven told himself this arrangement was simply how things were. Omegas were often quiet, often content to stay in the background. His Omega, he assumed, was simply quieter than most. He never once wondered if her silence was something else entirely, a shield she had built because speaking up had never changed anything in her life. He did not know that Selene cried alone at night, careful to keep the sound from carrying through the stone walls. He did not know she had learned his daily schedule, not out of duty, but so she could avoid crossing his path, sparing them both the awkward silence that always fell between them. He did not know that the servants and nobles whispered about the king's cold, forgettable Omega, and that she heard every word and said nothing, because saying something had never once made her life easier. Draven noticed his son, though. He noticed Cailan fiercely, almost desperately, as if pouring all his love into the boy could make up for the wife he had lost. He trained Cailan in swordsmanship himself. He taught him the old laws of the pack, the history of their bloodline, the weight of the crown he would one day carry. He sat with him during long council meetings, patient and proud, determined that his son would grow into a strong and just alpha. What Draven never noticed was who Cailan ran to when he fell and scraped his knee. He never noticed whose name the boy said first, long before he learned to say father. He never noticed the quiet woman who had, without any title or recognition, become the only mother his son had ever known. It happened on an ordinary evening. During a war council meeting, Draven could not afford to leave. Enemy forces were gathering along the northern border, and his advisors argued over troop movements while red markers crept across a map spread wide over the long table, inching closer to Ashfell land like a slow and patient threat. The mood in the room was tense. Every voice was raised in urgency. No one noticed the sound of small footsteps until it was too late to stop them. The doors burst open. 5-year-old Cailan ran into the room, his boots slapping hard against the stone floor, his face streaked with tears, a fresh cut bleeding above his eyebrow where he had fallen from the fence in the training yard. The guards outside had tried to stop him, but he was fast, and grief and pain make even small children faster than anyone expects. He did not run toward his father. He ran straight past the king's startled, outstretched arms. He ran past the advisors frozen mid-sentence. He ran past the map of a kingdom he would one day rule, and threw himself against the quiet Omega standing near the wall, where she always stood, small and unnoticed, waiting for a meeting she was never truly part of to end. "Mama," he sobbed, burying his face in the fabric of her dress. "Mama, it hurts." The room fell completely silent. Selene did not hesitate for even a moment. She dropped to her knees immediately, her hands moving with practiced gentleness, as she checked the cut above his eyebrow, wiping his tears away with her thumb, the same way she always did when no one important was watching. "I know, sweetheart," she murmured softly. "I know it hurts. Let me look. You are all right. You are so brave." Draven stood frozen at the head of the table, the words still echoing in his ears. "Mama. Not nursemaid. Not simply her. Mama." For the first time in 3 years, he truly looked at his Omega. He saw the gentleness in her hands as she tended to his son's wound. He saw the quiet exhaustion carved faintly beneath her eyes, the kind that comes from years of sleepless nights no one ever thanked her for. He saw the way Kaelin curled into her, small and trusting, as though she were the safest place in the entire world. And in that moment, Draven finally understood 3 years of mournings he had never witnessed. 3 years of a woman quietly building a family out of grief, while he stood only a few rooms away, mourning a wife who was gone, and completely overlooking the one who had been standing beside him all along. The advisors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to continue the meeting or pretend they had not just watched their king's expression crumble. "Leave us," Draven said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt. "All of you." The room emptied quickly, footsteps hurrying out, doors closing softly behind them. Selene rose slowly to her feet, Kaelin's small hand still fisted tightly in the fabric of her skirts. She kept her eyes lowered, as she always did in Draven's presence, bracing herself, as she always did, for indifference, or worse, for irritation at having interrupted something important. "Selene," Draven said. His voice was rough, unfamiliar even to his own ears. He could not remember the last time he had said her name aloud. She looked up at him, startled by the sound of it. "How long," he asked slowly, "has he been calling you that?" Her throat tightened. For a moment, it looked as though she might lie, might shrink back into the careful invisibility she had worn like armor for 3 long years. But something in her seemed to give way instead, worn down by the weight of hiding for so long. "Since he could speak," she admitted quietly. "I never taught him to say it. He simply started, on his own. I did not know how to correct a grieving child, so I never tried. I am sorry if it overstepped." "Do not apologize," Draven said, and the words came out broken, heavier than he intended. "Do not apologize for being the only parent who truly showed up for him." Selene's eyes filled with tears, and for once, she did not look away quickly enough to hide them. Draven crossed the room, the very same room where they had sat through countless formal dinners without him ever truly seeing her, and knelt first in front of his son, brushing the boy's hair back gently, checking the small cut above his eyebrow himself. "You gave everyone quite a fright," he murmured, and Kaelin gave a small, hiccuping laugh through his tears. Then Draven looked up at Selene, who was still kneeling beside them, and for the first time in 3 years, let her see everything he had never said aloud. "I have been a poor husband," he admitted, "and an even worse one for not noticing sooner what kind of mother my son already had. That changes today." "You do not have to," Selene started, old habits pulling her toward the door, ready to make herself small again, ready to disappear the way she always had. "I do," Draven said firmly. "Not because he called you Mama in front of my entire council, because it was true long before today, and I was the last person in this castle to realize it." He rose to his feet and offered her his hand, not as a king granting favor to a quiet, forgotten Omega, but as a man finally seeing his wife for who she truly was. Selene hesitated only a moment before she placed her hand in his. In the days that followed, small things began to change. Draven started arriving early to meals, not because duty required it, but because he wanted to sit across from her and actually speak. He asked about her day. He listened when she answered, really listened, in a way he never had before. He noticed the small furrow of concentration on her face when she read to Kaelin at night, and one evening, he quietly joined them, sitting on the edge of the boy's bed, as Selene's voice filled the room with a story about brave wolves and distant stars. At first, Selene remained cautious. 3 years of being overlooked does not disappear in a single evening. She waited for the change to fade, for Draven to grow busy again, for the old silence to return, once the shock of that moment in the war room wore off. But the change did not fade. Instead, it grew steadier with each passing week. Draven began asking her opinion on matters beyond the nursery. When advisors debated trade routes or harvest concerns, he would sometimes turn to her, curious what she thought, surprising both her and the room each time. Slowly, she began to speak more freely, offering thoughts she had kept quiet for years, discovering that her voice, once given space, was steady and clear and worth hearing. Thoughts Kalan noticed the shift too, in his own simple way. He began asking his father to join their evening walks through the garden, no longer surprised when Draven actually came. He began calling Celine Mama in front of everyone, not just in private moments, his voice bright and certain, as though it had always been the most natural thing in the world, which in truth, it had been. The war along the northern border eventually settled, resolved through careful diplomacy rather than bloodshed. But something else had shifted permanently within the castle walls, something far more lasting than any treaty. Draven Ashfell had finally opened his eyes to what had been quietly growing beside him for 3 long years, and he did not intend to look away again. One evening, months later, Draven found Celine alone in the garden, sitting beneath the same tree where Kalan often played. The sunset painted the sky in soft shades of orange and gold, and for a long moment, Draven simply stood and watched her, the way he wished he had done from the very beginning. "You once told me you never taught him to call you Mama," he said, walking closer. "You said it just happened." Celine looked up, a small, uncertain smile touching her lips. "It did. I think," Draven said slowly, sitting down beside her, "that some things become true simply because they always were, whether anyone notices them or not." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I did not notice you, Celine. For 3 years, I let my grief blind me to everything good that was quietly happening around me. I am sorry for that. I intend to spend a long time making up for it." Celine's eyes softened, tears gathering, but not falling this time. "You do not owe me an apology for grieving," she said gently, "but thank you for seeing me now." "Always," Draven promised, and for the first time, the word did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something real. Kalan came running across the garden a moment later, laughing, chasing a butterfly with the boundless energy only a child possesses. He stumbled once, caught himself, and kept running, completely unaware of the quiet, meaningful moment his parents were sharing beneath the tree. Draven watched his son with pride, and then he looked at Celine, truly looked at her, the way he should have from the very start. In her quiet strength, in her patient love, in the family she had built almost entirely on her own, he finally recognized what had been in front of him all along. It had taken his son running to her, calling her mother in a room full of strangers, for Draven to finally see the truth. But better late than never, he thought, reaching for her hand as the sun dipped low behind the castle walls. Some kinds of love do not announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they simply wait quietly to be noticed, patient and steady, until finally, someone opens their eyes and sees. And from that day forward, King Draven Ashfell never failed to see her again,